Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated chess player over the board, and in this series I'm going from 1000 to 2000 elo on chess.com rapid and trying to explain my thought process as best as I possibly can during the games and in the post-game analysis to entertain and educate those of you watching. So let's get straight into the game. My opponent plays the Sicilian Defense, and my recommendation against the Sicilian Defense is to move a3. My opponent did he? Yeah, he pre-moved knight c6. I could have easily gone d4, and that would have been a pretty horrific pre-move. The whole point of this a3 move, which by the way, I have a playlist linked below with every game on this channel featuring this opening, is to go b4 and immediately sack this pawn. And if knight takes, we're going to play c3 with a tempo on the knight, kick the knight back to c6, which is its only real viable square, and then we're going to go d4 and take the full center for the cost of one pawn. And one pawn isn't really that big of a deal because, of course, we have a massive space advantage in the center. We can bring this bishop to a3 if we want, which could be useful. We also have access to the g4 square in some situations to target g7. But my opponent goes d5, and this is a very, very tricky line. So we're going to take on d5. And this is what the majority of people play. And after queen takes d5, there is one move here for white that I think I have maybe a 70 or 80% win rate in on my main account at 2000 elo, which is to move knight to a3. Knight to a3 is played essentially with the intention of going to b5 and trying to fork on c7. Bishop f5 is a very interesting move because after knight b5, rook c8, I'm pretty sure we're supposed to take on a7. And things get wild. They get absolutely wild, but I am 95% sure this is the correct continuation. A move like bishop c4 here would of course hang g2. My opponent goes rook c8, of course, to stop knight to c7. And then, yeah, I think you're just supposed to take on a7. And, like I said, things get pretty wild, because if takes and takes, we target b7, we have access to the a8 square, we have access to this diagonal against my opponent's king. My bishop can come out to this diagonal if it wants. And it's also equal material because we have won our pawn back that we gambited. Now, black has slightly better development than us. He has 3 pieces developed, we only have 1. But one of the good things about our position is our bishops can get out very easily, our knight can get out very easily, our queen can get out very easily. Interesting. So the move e6 of course makes sense, but it does stop this bishop from dropping back to d7. So I intend to play the move queen to a4 check. And if queen d7, we can take, take, take. We win a pawn. Actually, no, sorry. If queen d7, we just play bishop b5. Wait, black is losing. Black is lost, isn't he? Queen a4 check. And if he blocks with the queen or the rook, we just play bishop b5. And if he blocks with the rook, we also have ideas of this anyway. But yeah, we play bishop b5. The queen is pinned to the king. And it's basically game over. Game over. This opening is so good. This a3 Sicilian. Now, I don't know if I've actually played this exact line before, but the game flows very, very nicely. I mean, I would argue that after the gambit is played, the moves are very obvious, right? You attack the knight, you take the center, you take the pawn, you develop the knight because you're trying to target the weak c7 square. Bishop f5 of course makes sense. You target the weak c7 square, which is essentially a double attack. You take the pawn. My opponent plays the move e6. We give a check, and then we win a queen. I don't think anything particularly complicated has happened. Okay, knight e7. Of course, my opponent cannot stop himself from losing the queen. I'm tempted to take on b7. And then we have threats of rook e7, bishop e7, bishop c6, which would be a slightly better variation, I think. Of course, everything is winning. This is completely winning. But I don't want to give my opponent anything. Anything. So let's take on b7. Let me just double check I'm not doing anything silly. No, that's completely fine. This can't happen because of this. This, of course, can't happen because of this. And I'm threatening rook e7 check, bishop or king takes e7, removing the second defender of the queen, and then we can take and my opponent cannot take back. That is what I want to do. And then I will be winning a queen for what? I get a queen and a knight for a rook. So that's pretty damn good. That's pretty damn good. I can't really offer you a much better position after 13 moves than going up a queen. And the thing is, what else is Black supposed to do? What else is he supposed to do? I don't know. I don't know, because all the way back here, he probably has to move his king to d8 or e7. I mean, if e7, then the bishop comes to a3. And then we're just going to win this bishop after king d8. So the king has to go to the d8 square, and let me tell you, that is not looking very nice. Okay, bishop e4. Makes sense. You defend the queen, you attack g2. I am incredibly tempted to play the move f3. I know I can take this queen, but after queen takes, bishop takes, my queen is under attack, my rook is under attack, and my g2 pawn is under attack, where my rook is behind. So that doesn't seem like a good idea. The move f3 I like. Although if takes, check, bishop c6. It's a little bit uncomfortable. That's a good move. That's a good move from my opponent. Maybe we can just play rook b6, attacking the queen. Let me think a second. Or if we take the queen, and then if bishop takes, we can take on e7, and after the bishop takes on e7, we could play queen a6, attacking the rook and the bishop, which would force my opponent to castle to protect his rook, and then we can play knight to f3, stopping bishop takes f2. Sorry, stopping bishop takes g2. That looks good. Can we do better? We have time to think about this position. F3. My issue was queen b5, queen b5, bishop c6. But then I suppose we can take on e7 then. And after bishop takes e7, queen a6, and after castle, we get the exact same position as if we take the queen now, except I have a pawn on f3, which is an improvement, because then g2 isn't hanging, and I don't have to play knight to f3, allowing a doubling of the pawns. That makes a lot of sense. So I think f3. Let's do it. Pawn f3. Of course, we are completely winning, but I don't want to allow my opponent to have anything that could backfire on us, right? I want to be as winning as I possibly can. I also don't have to take on e7. My opponent goes king d8, so he doesn't play what I expected, which... Okay, yeah, I didn't consider that move. That makes a lot of sense. But I think I just take anyway. And actually, this is even better. This is actually better. Because after bishop takes, my rook and queen are under attack, but I have the move queen a5 check. Queen a5 check. I check the king, get my queen out of danger. There's no way for my opponent to block the check while attacking my queen. So let's say king to e8, then I just move the rook. And I go to c7, I think. Yeah. Rook c7. Rook a8 is the move I'm expecting, which I will meet with probably queen b6, threatening the bishop. And okay, so we come out of this with a queen and a pawn for a bishop. Whereas if we'd have taken here immediately, I think it would have been like a queen for a rook or something. So that's the game. That's game one. I will do a second game, by the way. Drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already, please. It really motivates me to keep making more videos. Let's get into a second game because that was far too short. I'm not going to do an analysis on that video. Like I say, if you want to see more about this opening, check the playlist down below. Let's get into a second game. All right. We have a game against Anand Yadav 177. My opponent goes for the English. We haven't seen the English yet in this, and I personally like to play this c6 setup and just go d5. I play it like a Caro Kann. I play it exactly the same way, and I do this against basically every opening when I'm playing black. And as silly as it looks, to basically play c6 d5 against pretty much everything, not absolutely everything, but pretty much everything, it still works very well. I promise you, it works very, very well. Huh. Can you do that? Queen d5 attacks the rook. You can't play bishop g2, so you have to play knight to f3. I mean, you can do it, of course, but is it good? I suppose it's fine. Let's just take with the pawn. Worth checking, though. Bishop to g2, of course. I'm going to go knight to c6. And I might take the center with the move e5 rather than playing it in typical Caro fashion by putting the pawn on e6. Again, just because I can, I don't have to play the exact Caro Kann setup. I just feel comfortable starting with the Caro Kann setup. I feel like we should go e5 now. And if d4, e4, if knight to e5, probably bishop d6, and if takes, I think I like that position. If he goes e4, I don't want to take... Oh, maybe I can take. Because the knight can't advance to g5. So if, like, knight to h4, we actually trap the knight with the move g5, so the knight would have to go back to g1. And then we just probably play a move like f5 supporting our pawn. So yeah, let's play e5. Because a lot of the time in these English Catalan type setups, e4 can be played, and after the pawn takes, a move like knight g5 can pick the pawn back up quite easily. Whereas here, that isn't really the case. So that's very good for us, of course. And we're going to try and take full advantage of this. And let's see what my opponent does. d3. Okay. I don't care too much about that. I'm going to play knight to f6. Keep on developing. I'll probably play bishop d6 and castle. And then I'll decide what to do with my light squared bishop. I could put it on e6, but I'm not quite sure yet. Firstly, we're going to focus on getting castled. So let's go bishop d6. Now if something like e4 gets played, I probably won't take because of knight takes e5 ideas at the end of the line. So if e4, I probably push d4 or play a move like bishop to e6, just supporting the center, although knight g5 could be quite annoying. Okay, bishop g5 is fine. I'm actually going to go bishop e6 in response to that, just to give this pawn a little bit more protection because the knight is being pinned. Yeah, we'll do it like that. And this is, of course, quite a common setup of minor pieces, just to try and control the center as best as humanly possible, because, of course, your minor pieces are very good at doing that in conjunction with pawns on e5 and d5, or, of course, in reverse on e4 and d4. And let's see what we can do here. Again, e4 might be played. I feel like d4 is probably the move against that. Knight c3. We could play h6, trying to get my opponent to take me, but I feel like castling is the more principled move, preparing a move like rook e8. He might be trying to go knight to b5, putting pressure on my bishop. Then I probably go bishop c5. Does that walk into the pawn to d4 though? Because then I can't advance as easily because my bishop would be hanging. And yes, his knight would be hanging, of course, but that's very complicated. If knight b5, it might be better just to go bishop back to b8 and just play the move a6 to kick the knight out. That's probably an easier way to go about it. And then if knight b5, bishop b8, and something like d4 gets played, then we can just advance because our bishop isn't hanging, and after something like knight d2, then we just play a6 and kick the knight away. My opponent goes d4. Now, he spent 2 moves doing that, so we can try and take advantage of that. Of course, taking would be a very silly idea, because knight takes, and we have an isolated d-pawn, and we have gained nothing. So I think e4 is the probably obvious move. Now, I do have to be very careful that my d5 pawn doesn't get too destabilized by moves like queen b3 potentially, trying to pile on pressure. And of course, this bishop being pinned, sorry, my knight being pinned means that my knight isn't defending that square. So I do have to be a little bit careful in this position. But I think we should be good. I think knight d2 is the only move, no? Knight e1 makes no sense, because you can only come to c2, and then where are you going? Knight to h4 I don't think makes much sense, because you're in danger of getting trapped, because I'm controlling a lot of your movement, and you can't go back to g2. So knight d2 seems like the only move. I'm confused. Have I missed something? No, he goes knight to e1. Wow. Well, I feel like h6 is the best move here, because I want my opponent to take me so that I can put pressure on the d4 square, because my queen and my knight would be attacking d4, right? So let's say bishop takes, queen takes. We are attacking this square twice, and if white plays a move like e3 to defend, then a move like f3 becomes harder in the future, which is how I expect my opponent to try and break out of his position, because I, of course, have a lot of space in the center. Drops his bishop back. Interesting. I can play the move knight to g4, attacking the bishop further, which I think I really like, because, of course, the f-pawn can't move because I take the bishop. And if knight to g4 and my opponent does something like h3, then I think I probably take and ruin his pawn structure. And then it's very difficult for him to move because he has no f-pawn break. And if knight to g4 and something like knight c2 is played, supporting the bishop with the knight, then I probably play the move f5, so that if f3 does ever come, and he takes, then I have extra support on the e4 pawn. So I like this move. I think this is a very logical move. I'm not just playing knight g4 because it looks dangerous or threatening or anything like that. I'm playing it, one, because it puts pressure on the bishop, which, if I take, would ruin his structure. 2, stops my opponent from moving his f-pawn, because his bishop would hang. And 3, if he does something to save his bishop, like he just did, I prepare the move f5 to really, really support my e4 pawn. And after he kicks me out, I'm just going to drop back. I'm just going to drop back and look at my center. Look at my center. It's fantastic. We have a lot of space here. My dark square bishop is a really good piece. Again, a move like knight to b5 attacking my bishop. I will just go bishop to b8. My opponent goes f3, but by putting my knight on g4 and inducing the move h3, the g3 pawn is hanging. Don't just look at what your opponent's moves do. Look at what they don't do. This pawn used to defend these 2 squares. It no longer defends those 2 squares. And this pawn, because we played the move f5, is very well defended. Now, if this pawn wasn't on f5, and my opponent played f3, he would be threatening take, 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 and take, winning a pawn. Now he is not, because after takes, takes, we're good. Something like takes, takes might have some tactics with the move e5, although we're probably fine, but I'd rather take with the f pawn. So we're just going to snatch up the g3 pawn. Now, my opponent could try something like f4 to try and trap my bishop, but of course I can always bail out by taking his knight, so that's not really a problem. Now we are not only, now we don't just have a massive center, trying to realize how to speak English again, but we're also up a pawn, and my opponent's king is looking rather weak. It's also not obvious how he develops his pieces. This knight, like I said, coming to the e1 square doesn't have either the f3 or the d3 squares. Its only square is c2. And the action is kind of happening on this side of the board, right? Not really the queen side. Bishop f4 makes a lot of sense. We could, of course, take. We could, of course, take. But can we do better than that? I like the look of the move knight to h5, attacking the bishop 3 times and defending my bishop. If knight h5, bishop g3, rook f1, bishop f1, knight g3 attacking the bishop. We have pressure on h3, pressure on the bishop. Queen g5 is coming, rook f8 is coming. If knight to h5, taking is probably bad. If he plays the move e3 to try and guard his bishop, then we just win a pawn. So that's absolutely fine in probably a multitude of ways. If we go knight to h5 and he retreats his bishop to d2, let's say, then I like the look of the move knight to f4, targeting the h3 pawn and the bishop. There's a lot of different things we can do. The only thing we have to be concerned about is e3 does attack the knight. That's the only thing we have to keep an eye on, I think. Other than that, I like the look of this move, so let's play it. Of course, we will check everything with the engine after this game. The first game I didn't because it was quite a quick game, and I feel like everything was pretty maybe not self-explanatory, but I think I explained everything in a way that we didn't necessarily need the engine to really understand the position. Bishop g3. Now, of course, I could take the bishop first, but after rook f8, queen f8, I don't love that. I'd rather my queen on the g5 square, targeting this g-file in conjunction with bishop to h3 ideas. So I prefer taking the rook first, so that my queen doesn't have to come to f8. Then we can take on g3 with pressure on the bishop. My queen can come to g5, and my rook can come to f8. Of course. Taking on g3 is completely winning. It's completely winning, but this is more winning. We could take this bishop, but there's no need. There's no need. Let's just bring our queen into g5. Now we are aligned with the king. We're preparing rook to f8 with threats of actually winning the bishop. My opponent goes bishop to g2. Now we could maybe take on h3, and after bishop takes, we do have discovered checks. I don't know if those are that effective, though. We could play a move like knight to h5, opening up this threat and preparing knight to f4 to target the weak light squares. That is true. I think I prefer the move rook to f8, though, to stop this queen from getting to f1 to help out the defense. So I'm going to play it. If I have missed some obvious tactic, of course the computer will show us after the game. Like, you know, here would be double check. And king to h1 has to be the move. Ooh, okay. So I assume he wants to bring his queen to the g1 square to help out the defense, which makes sense. But queen f4 might be an issue for him. We're threatening knight to f1 double check, king moves, and queen h2 checkmate because the rook defends the knight. I don't know if you can stop that. You probably have to bring your king back, and then I mean, I can just play queen f2 check, and if king back, we figure it out from there. Let's do it. Queen f4. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if I saw a move like queen g1. Or actually, I'd probably expect a move like pawn to e3, attacking my queen, missing this knight f1, king g1, and queen to h2 checkmate idea. If queen to g1, it complicates matters a little bit, because knight f1, king h1, we don't have this mate, because the queen covers the h2 square. So on queen g1, we can just take on e2 with discovered check, and then pick up the queen. So that is not a concern at all. I don't think white can defend himself properly. King to g1 might be the best try. In that case, queen f2, king back to h2. What do we do there? Oh, no, actually, if king g1, we can play bishop h3. Because if bishop takes, queen f2 is mate. Because you don't have the h2 square, because the bishop no longer blocks my queen's control of that square. So king g1, bishop h3 is the most accurate. Now, you can't do it in this move order as easily, because if king g1, queen f2 check, oh my god, king h2, bishop h3, the king can take on h3. And then, I don't know if the mate is quite as easy to pull off. So, if king g1, it's better to take on h3 first. And the queen can never come to f1 to force a trade, because our knight controls that square very nicely. My opponent is still thinking, and we'll see if he can find a way to get out of this position. But I doubt it. I very heavily doubt it. Let's see what he does, though. Maybe I'm missing something. But I don't think so, because this threat is so strong. And attacking the queen in any way, like offering a queen trade on c1, or playing a move like pawn to e3 doesn't work, because knight f1 always comes with double check. And double check always means the king has to move. Always means the king has to move. Because it means it's getting attacked from two different angles, right? Which means that you can't take the piece, because there's two pieces, and you can't block, because there's two angles of attack. Okay, king g1, like expected. I think bishop to h3 is the move here. So let's play it. You can't take because of mate, and the knight covers the h1 square, the queen covers the h2 square because the bishop has moved. And if my opponent doesn't do anything, well, okay, he does, so let's deliver this checkmate. Very, very nice. If he doesn't take the bishop, I don't even know what he does. Let's say he goes e3, then we just go checkmate. So, yeah, very nice. Let's analyze the game, and let's find some of the intricacies there, because that was a very interesting game. This is hype. This is hype. 96.6% accuracy against the English over 24 moves. That's pretty good. I can't offer you much better than that. Let's analyze. So c4, c6. Now, like, you can actually transpose back to a Caro Kann after the move e4, and I think this is known as the accelerated Panov attack. It's like a weird Scandinavian Caro Kann mix. It's actually quite difficult to play with the black pieces, and if you play white and struggle against the Caro, this is a really good option, by the way. But my opponent goes g3, plays it in like an English style, of course. We go d5. cd5 is not the best move. I was surprised when my opponent played that, because I thought the whole point was to play it in Gambit style. Now, I personally wouldn't take that pawn, because I know my opponent will be far more aware of the theory than I would, so I don't want to go into that kind of a battle. But this is typically how you're supposed to play it. You're not really supposed to take, but of course I oblige. Bishop g2, knight c6, knight f3, e5. Now, I could have played e5 on this move, but I just wanted to get the knight out first, to be honest. I felt more comfortable with this knight out. So e5. d3 is played, which was a little bit surprising. If a move like d4 is played here, don't take. just watch the eval bar. It goes from minus 0.45, minus 0.47, minus 0.51 to plus 0.69-ish. You would give away a whole point or more of evaluation. So you just push. You attack the knight probably comes to e5, and bishop d6 was my plan, which is the best move. And it's very difficult to defend this knight. If you take, this is a great position for black. Great position. Almost -1 advantage. But my opponent doesn't do that. After e5, he plays d3, which is in an English style. We go knight to f6, castle, bishop d6. The computer preferred the move h6, I assume, to stop ideas of bishop g5 or knight g5 if bishop to e6 is played. But okay. We go bishop d6, bishop g5, bishop e6. This is a very solid position. It's completely equal. My opponent goes knight c3. The computer wants me to drop my bishop back, interestingly, but I decide to castle. The computer wants takes knight h4, opening up the attack on the d5 pawn. And it then changes its mind, so it prefers knight d2. It changed its mind because of the move g5. And then I'm supposed to go d4, and then white has very nice control over the e4 square, so that probably wouldn't be great. What's wrong with knight to e7? What? Oh, wow, and if takes, the queen can't defend the bishop. That's hilarious. My opponent goes d4, though. We, of course, push e4. Like I said before, the evaluation is on minus 0.4. If you take, the evaluation goes to plus 0.4. Don't take for no reason. We push, take the space, and here I was shocked, absolutely shocked on knight e1. Why you wouldn't put the knight on d2 is beyond me. Maybe he wanted to give his bishop more retreating space, which he did later use. But the knight did nothing all game after going to e1. It went to c2 and was useless. Like I said, the actual drama was happening over here, not over on c2. Sorry about that. Something just dropped off my desk. It was getting involved in the excitement of the chess game, probably. So I go h6. Best move. And I wanted my opponent to take. After queen takes, we apply pressure to d4. If a move like e3 is played, this is very nice for the black pieces because f3 becomes difficult to play now without the support of the pawn. And if knight c2, which I was expecting to defend this pawn in a better way, you can do a lot of different things here. There's rook a to d8, there's queen g6, queen g5. I think these with the intention of playing f5, yes, which is very similar, of course, to what we did in the game. But my opponent has to take. He drops his bishop back, though, and the best move here is knight to g4, for all of the reasons that I explained in the game, right? You want to do this, so let's say h3 is played, you take, and you actually do win the g3 pawn. But let's say you don't win the g3 pawn, let's just add these two moves in. The game is still basically impossible for white. I think queen c7 just wins this pawn anyway. I don't think you can even defend it. Yeah, this pawn is just lost, no? Yeah, the computer wants to give up the exchange to save the pawn. But the point is, this is a threat, taking on e3. But even if this pawn wasn't hanging, this is still a massive threat, because white can no longer break out of the position with f3. And without f3, black is in full control. Black dominates the white pieces. Can maybe even go for ideas like this, potentially. Queen g5 is a nice move going after the weak e3 pawn. The knight can come into c4 via a5 to apply more pressure. This is abysmal. The computer just wants to give this pawn up. That's how bad things are. My opponent goes bishop c1, which is actually a good move because I have a lot of threats. I play the move f5. My opponent goes h3, which is a mistake. Better was bishop h3, applying pressure with the bishop so that g3 has more defense, so that f3 is more playable, I assume. And after knight to f6, f3 is a little bit better now. And black is still in total control, don't get me wrong. What you should never do is take here with black, watch the eval bar jump, you lose a whole point of advantage, because this is exactly what white wants. Going to take back with the e-pawn, probably play f4 and whack a knight on the e5 square, and that's going to be very uncomfortable. But my opponent goes h3. I drop the knight back. We don't need to do anything fancy. Now you could even do something like this, to be fair. Rook takes would be met with bishop g3, and if the rook drops back, then computer thinks that black is winning somehow. Maybe, I don't know, queen h4, bishop h3 ideas, or maybe f3, I'm not sure. But there's no need to do anything like that. Just drop the knight back. Drop the knight back. f3 is played, which of course hangs the g3 pawn. The computer here wants to bring the bishop back to f4, so after going to g5, e3, c1, it wants to come back to f4, and after a bishop trade ruining white's structure, and knight to h5 going after this pawn, e3 makes it really difficult to play f3 in the future, but the knight is under attack. Queen h4 defends the knight. And then f3, g5. This looks pretty commanding for black after moves like king h7 and rook g8. Very, very difficult. But my opponent chooses f3, which of course hangs a pawn. He then takes on e4. F takes e4 is very instructive. You could take with two other things. F takes is the best. D takes e4 is fine, but there's no real need to be taking away from the center like that. You also, this move isn't playable, but it could be in the future. But just get your rook in the game and open your bishop up. F takes is definitely better. You could take with the knight, but like this bishop kind of sucks now, and the knight can come back into the game as well. So take with the f pawn, open the bishop up, open the rook up, prepare the knight to get involved in the action. These pieces are still locked out of the game by this central wedge. This piece is locked out the game. This is locked out the game. The bishop doesn't have any great squares, although it does go to f4, which is the best move. We go knight to h5, which is the best move. Again, you could take, absolutely. The computer thinks it's mildly worse than knight to h5. The game is still completely over, you know. Queen d6 attacking the rook, e3 defending the rook, rook f7 followed by probably rook a to f8 and knight. Okay, maybe not knight h5 ideas. But it's still great. It's still great. But knight h5 is more accurate because it's very difficult for white to play this position, of course. The computer wants to give up the knight for a pawn. That's how bad it is. He takes on g3. Rook f1 is the best move. Like I said, you could definitely take on g3. Definitely. But again, watch the eval bar. It's minus 4.5. Now is minus 3.9. You're still completely winning. But rook takes f1 is slightly better. Because if you do this, here, you don't have any threats yet. You're completely winning. Your upper pawn, massive space advantage, way more activity than white. But you don't have a raging kingside attack like we got in the game after rook f1, bishop f1, and knight g3. The knight goes to c2, which was odd because it's completely out the game. Queen g5, queen h4 was a little bit better, going after the h3 pawn. And if here, then knight f1, queen f1, keeping an eye on the pawn. And if rook here, if the queen comes to g2 to keep defending the pawn, we of course have rook f2 winning the queen. I didn't necessarily see that. It also didn't necessarily matter. Queen g5 is played. Bishop g2 is kind of forced. Here I did consider the move bishop takes h3, but of course you can see the computer doesn't like it. And I was thinking, well, maybe we have, you know, double check ideas. It's not that good. It's not very impressive. Of course, white could mess it up and play something like king to h2 and blunder mate. But if white instead just goes king to h1, black doesn't have that much. The knight just has to come back to g3, and I mean, you're winning, but why are you complicating things? Rook f8 is the best move, so I'm very happy that I found this. Knight h5 coming into f4 is also very good, which I did mention during the game, because you're just overloading these light squares, right? And there's very little white can do about it. But rook f8 gets our last piece into the game. This knight isn't participating in the attack, but it's keeping pressure on the d4 pawn. So these pieces can't just wander off, because I will take. And I suppose you could rotate it via e7 to f5 if you really wanted to. King h2 is played, e3 is the best move here. And, oh, the computer actually likes the plan of knight e7. That's interesting. Trying to get the knight to f4. Sorry, f5. Very cool. But king h2 is played, and queen f4 is the best move. And we have so many threats. We have so many threats. I was half expecting the move e3, attacking the queen, which would lose to knight f1 check. Double check. Like I said, double checks, king has to move. King moves and mate. The knight is defended, the queen is defended, and f2 is defended. My opponent instead chooses to move king to g1, which is the best move. Now, I was half expecting the move queen to g1, where our plan, we don't get to mate my opponent, but we do get to play knight takes e2 check and take the queen, which is obviously winning. He chooses king to g1, and again, well, let me just let the computer think a second. It's torn between these two moves. They're both great, and I mean, bishop h3 is slightly better, but I didn't know what to do after queen f2, king h2. Okay, yeah, it wants to come back to f4. So, queen f2 is not a good move, unless you really wanted to gain time on the increment, because there's no threat. There's no threat. You have to go for this bishop takes h3 idea. That is the whole point. The only other plan is to bring the knight to e7, and then into f5 and probably into h4. But that's very long-winded. Bishop h3 is immediately on the board. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 attackers. My opponent has 1 defender. He can never bring this queen to help defend because we control that square so many times. And the game is over. My opponent does blunder mate in 1, of course, but what else can he do? The computer's best idea is queen e1, defending the f2 square. Bishop h2. Sorry, bishop g2, king g2, and knight f5. And what you do here is white. Queen f1 is the computer's favorite move. Queen g5 or g4 check. King h2. Queen g3 check. King h1. Queen h4 check. King g1. And rook f6 followed by rook g6. Queen g2 does stop rook to g6. But the hilarious move, king h7, enforces this idea. And if the king tries to run, then we of course have double checking ideas, picking up the queen. So my opponent does blunder mate with bishop takes h3, but I can hardly blame him. If you struggle against the English, maybe try this Caro Kann setup. Your opponent probably won't be as kind as mine was, but it's certainly a viable option. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like and subscribe. Like I said, it really motivates me to keep making more videos. And check out the video popping up over here, because I think you're really going to enjoy it.